idea of these vortices that develop. In our case, is a classic one where you have the damaging mesovortex developing in conjunction with the rear ascending rear and strengthening rear inflow jet right on the cyclonic side of the surge nose. And our case is a little interesting because we had two of them back to back. And if you haven't read this paper, I'd stick your nose in it, give it a good read. It's an excellent paper. And this is also from that paper. This is a numerical simulation they did to show on the top here is a series of the simulation at different hours. And I love this because it looks a lot like the case I'm going to show you. It looks a lot like the case we had in Grand Rapids on September 11th. You have you have several mergers going on there, and kind of an upscale growth of the mesocyclone as it goes. And so our wind damage starts out, especially on the east-west segment, which I'm really highlighting today, starts out as a small area of damage, sporadic down the whole track, and then towards the end, where you have the merger of the two mesovortices, you get a more complicated, broader swath of damage that then started to turn southeast towards Lowell. The bottom pictures are sort of a cross section to show the interaction of the rear inflow jet with the circulation of the mesovortice, and how the mesovortex, the pressure gradient force of the mesovortex helps to develop the high winds on the right cyclonic flank of the mesovortice as it's racing eastward. Whoops, didn't mean to do that to you. The second paper, Holland, Riordan, and Franklin, I'm sorry if I'm not getting the middle Allen's last name spelled correctly. They just took they took several vortices, and they had a very simple Treefall model, and they ran these different vortices, and the vortices had different amounts of convergence and translation as in addition to the actual rotational strength of the vortex itself. So they did a whole bunch of simulations to look at what the Treefall patterns would differ over these different things. And then so we have to reorient ourselves, because in their paper, everything was moving from south to north. So when we're looking at translation, we're looking at translation from south to north in these. And they only showed a couple. They were really focused on the tree damage. So I went back to my Sioux here in Grand Rapids, TJ Trenage, and he created these representations of what the authors used in the paper to create the wind damage. So thank you to TJ for doing that for me. You'll see. So right away on the two we're seeing here, the one on the left basically is a vortex which is moving quite rapidly to the north. So you see the strong winds are displaced to the right of it. The one on the left is non-convergent. So it's all rotational velocity as compared to the one on the right, which has strong radial velocity. So the one on the right would be more of a tornadic looking mesocyclone. The one on the left would be a non-tornadic mesocyclone, if you will, where you don't have any strong convergence. And really exaggerating the differences to sort of pull out, so you can kind of see how things look. And right away, the thing I want to catch your eye, so you imagine what this would look like on radar. The one on the right is going to look more gate to gate to you. The one on the left is going to look like a broad circulation. It's kind of hint, hint. So here are their actual pictures with the enhanced vortices by thank you to TJ, and laid on each one of these, so we can see what the actual vortex and that caused the damage in each one of these is, and they exactly match the specification. So let's look at the upper left-hand panel here. In VR, which is the radial velocity, is 0 in this case. The tangential velocity is 28. That's meters per second. The translational velocity is 32 meters per second, and the peak wind there is 60 meters per second, so 120 knots. And so there's the Treefall pattern there. in their simulation. So you can contrast that. Now that I couldn't get quite apples to apples out of their paper, but if you go down now, you're increasing to a much stronger vortex. But again, the radial velocity is 0, so you can see sort of the same pattern you see in the upper left, in the lower left, just enhanced, more tree fall, and you kind of get the idea there. Now, if you go to the right-hand side, you really turn on the radial velocity to be a good percentage, in terms of the upper right-hand corner. The radial velocity is 40 meters per second, and the tangential is 49. So this would be a really good tornadic storm, very strong upward velocity, very strong radial convergence into the center of the storm, and you get something that looks very, if you've ever been on a really like no-brainer tornado survey, this is what the damage. And let me get you away from, don't get your head wrapped around just tree fall here. This is just, I think what I got out of this paper is this tree fall gives me a good understanding of what overall damage characteristics might look like in terms of the convergence. When we talk about, oh, it's an obvious convergent pattern to the damage, trees included. This is what I'm really looking at. So the movement of debris and everything else too. The upper right is a classic one. Then the lower right one, we turned down the radial velocity, we turned up the tangential velocity a little bit. You still have a very strong convergence signature there. So if I go to the next picture here, kind of outlined, eyeballing where the differences here. And what you get on the left-hand side, in both of those cases, when you have sort of a very weakly convergent mesocyclone, is you get sort of these stripes of convergent and divergent damage, and that's real. And in fact, the lower left one, keep that where, kind of put that one in your back pocket, because it looks like some of the damage I'm going to show you in a few frames from now. Then on the right, this is very classic tornado damage, and you'll see none of this in the damage surveys that I'm going to show you today. There's nothing that looked anything like the two right-hand slides there, not even a weaker version of those two. Most of the damage we surveyed looks like the left-hand side. So again, in case you forgot 3 frames ago, here's what the survey damage looked like. All right, we'll go to the first part. So point A was really just some tree fall, and it was pretty localized and sporadic, so I'll skip that. And it was so we'll go right to where what really got everybody's attention was this Belknap Apartments, and that's at point B. And I'm really pointing at, this is really the damage area, and in particular, it's Belknap Apartments. So you can see I-96, the storm goes through between 7 and 8 p.m., sort of the tail end of the rush hour. There is moderate traffic on I-196 at this time of the day, and I will show you that. And then across the highway there, those are all a line of that's the medical mile. So several of those buildings are hospitals or medical centers of some kind. They're 5 to 15 stories tall. And then over to the right, I have circled McDonald's. I ate lunch there on the damage survey the next day, and just to keep in mind, the path of the mesocyclone went right from Belknap Apartments and just right over that interchange in McDonald's. So the fact that I could eat at McDonald's the next day, kind of eye-opening in itself. And I didn't realize, I just kind of was sort of not the healthiest lunch either, and I don't usually eat at McDonald's, so don't peg me for that. But that was my options, and I was really hungry after walking around all day. So let's take a look at what Belknap Apartments look like. Here are your before pictures. So now we're looking east from 131, and I should have showed you. Let me go back for a second. 131 is just out of the picture on the left. And this view is actually on this off-ramp near that Division Ave and Auto Ave Northwest. That's the sort of vantage point you're looking at, and looking to the east at the Belknap Apartments. So you can see it's about 100+ foot bluff up to that building, and it's right on the corner there. It's called Lookout Hill. and it's actually prime real estate. I think because it's a nice view out over the Grand River as you're looking west. So here's what it looked like, excuse me, the morning after. Basically, there's one night now we're looking from the north towards the south, so you can see a little bit of the hospitals and other buildings on the other side of I-196. But basically, the three sections of roof, two of them completely, one of them key. Each section went due eastward, landing in the parking lot, and a piece of it caught the backside of that house. You can see my map right over here. The second one went up, most of it fell in front, but struck part of these two buildings. And then this piece over here is actually on the side of this building, just on the south side of that building. There are also some telephone wires here that the roof caught. Snapped a telephone pole here, and then you can see one that's kind of kinked here because it's got tension from that direction. So everything got kind of yanked and pulled. There's some pretty heavy cables that were on that. That's why it snapped in where it did right there. Had those big wad of phone and cables, cable wire type cables below the electrical lines. And there's a carport over here, which you can see in A on the right here. You can see some of the roof sticking out of. So, and then now I'm facing in B, I'm looking back, I'm standing on the road in front and looking back at the apartment complex there. And you can see some insulation. There was a lot of insulation that came out and it splattered on the road all over the place and around the cars and everything. But we don't have any real backwash on the building itself, and nor do we on the other side. And then if we look down the hill, there's really no damage. If we look at the adjacent house, there's some soffit damage to that house, and there are a couple of scattered tree damage that extends to the north of this area. Let's go to the next slide here. Here's a different perspective. Now we're looking due east. And so here's a look at the apartments again. Let me do that to you. And some other pictures of that where the roof landed. So what's really interesting about the scene is when you first see it, you're like, wow, look at all that damage. But as you keep looking at it and you walk around it, you realize that all of the damage is because that roof came off. That roof doesn't come off. There's really not much here other than some broken tree limbs and a couple of snapped trees or uprooted trees in this 2 or 3 block area. And so I'm pointing one to the house here where one of these roofing sections landed on the back side of it, causing the damage to that structure, which you can see in A here on the upper right. And then the other arrow that's pointing up towards those cranes. Well, McDonald's I told you I was right behind that. That's a big construction site. McDonald's is just on the other side of that building they're building. And this nose of the cyclone went right through those cranes. And it's not to say that they didn't experience the wind, strong winds, but what I'm trying to get at here is the damage is very, it's not continuous by any stretch of the imagination. And what's really kind of caught my eye here was that this roof, if it doesn't come off, there's really nothing to see here. There wasn't a whole lot of other direct damage, and it just looked to me, as I looked at from my experience, as I looked at the connection of the roof to this building, and I was able to view this laying in the middle of the road here, what I saw was very poorly anchored roof and the cinder block attachment, and all of the mortar and the cinder blocks was cracked and aged. I talked to the building owner. It was a very interesting conversation with the building owner. And then to make a long story short, you would assume this kind of damage, this building would have been demolished, but in fact, all they did is rebuild the roof. But the rest of the building was so sound that they didn't have to do any, they didn't have to tear it down. They just put a new roof on it. And that roof is, I should have taken a picture for this, but the roof is pretty much complete now. I'm sure they saw some interior water damage stuff to do, but I thought that was an interesting point. All right, so let's take a look at the radar, what we can see on the radar. And so can't really tilt up and down a lot in a presentation like this with the Great West case. There's a really nice, well-developed rear inflow jet. It's around 80 plus knots digging into the back side of this. You can see in the upper left in the reflectivity, you can see a nice rear inflow notch going there. And this is just a 3 or 4 frame loop just to show you what's going on. So the Belknap apartment is right there. And you can clearly see a little velocity shear gradient there with one of the mesocyclones. There's another one up to the north of it and starting to, that one's dissipating, and there's you can also see a little bit of the backdoor pole front outflow boundary sinking south into it. Not a lot to see in the spectrum width here because we have a lot of ground clutter contamination. The buildings downtown are actually cluttering the radar. They're so low right now. Same thing's happening in CC. There's some stuff there, but right right to the northeast of my white dot here is a little red square, and that's the next spot. You can see there's a little debris signature in the last frame right at that location, and that's sort of important. So let's jump to that now, and I'll show you this video. I'm probably gonna turn off the sound here, but this was really a great capture because this is the actual system going as it crosses I-196. There's some moderate traffic at the time, and right at the beginning you can see what the debris signature is there's just tons of branches and leaves on the highway. There's tons of branches and leaves flying through the air as they drive. Whether that's a good idea to be driving at all right now or in a moving vehicle right now is a good question, but I'll play that again. I hope it's coming across nice and clean on here, but we caught it. We're right, like the red square is right in right in this meso. It's right in the debris signature. You can see we have about 15 to 20 knots in the spectrum width at that point. We're right in the gust. We're right at the apex of this thing. And this person is, by the way, they're driving westward along 196, so they're heading towards Belknap Apartments. The storm is going the opposite direction that they are, and they're on a little bit of a curve. So they start out they're heading a little bit west-southwest in part of this video, and then turning back to the west as they go around that corner. I'll play that one more time. And I think they're actually getting the most of the gust front is right at the first few 10, 15 seconds of the video, and then you can see the rain really starts to thicken up, and you're still seeing leaf and branches falling, but not as frequent as you are at the very beginning of the video. And because they're heading west, you can see the results of it all over the road. Well, I thought that was pretty eye-opening. And this is just this is literally a quarter to a half a mile from the next area of damage we found, and it's about a mile from Belknap, I believe, by my memory serves. And we're really, my words down there, our half-degree beam slice is 311 feet radar feet above the ground at this point, which is we're right side lobes and everything are right in this. So and really up to the first view angles, we're right on the ground here. So back to what I was looking at, kind of describing. Here's the radar 1 minute later, 1.5 minutes later, and this is the same shot A and B, and I just put the non-divergent and the non-convergent rather, and the convergent examples on top of it to sort of show you what I mean. And what's happening is basically A is a better fit. The non-convergent mesocyclone looks or fits this two-dimensional wind better than does the convergent. And what I was saying earlier is you look at the convergent, if you really wanted to move those pixels around the color, the radar, you'd have more of a gate-to-gate signature there. It would be tighter, in other words. So while you certainly have some nice shear there, and you have obviously have a mesocyclone, it's not very convergent. And of course, this is just a snapshot. I think what's happening with the sporadic damage is the mesocyclone is trying to tighten up, and as it tightens up, we get a better connection with the rear inflow jet. We get these accelerations into it. It's almost like it's trying. My sort of feeling of this storm is it kept trying to go, and tornado genesis kept trying to occur and failing for whatever reason. So we have this. So we have a track, but we only have these little blasts of damage every once in a while. So here's damage survey site C. We're just looking at a quarter-mile, half-mile swath here, and it has that sort of divergent, non-divergent looking look to it, where to the south it looks like it's kind of spreading out. And on the north, you can kind of, on the north side of it, so the damage is the gradient's a little sharper, and you see this idea of a little bit of convergence towards the mesocyclone. So again, this looks like it's characteristic of a mesocyclone with weak convergence. So to me, non-tornadic, in other words. Look at some of the damage in here. So upper left is the before picture, and arrows sort of showing the direction of tree fall over this area, and then I've got a whole bunch of A, B, C, D, E, F's, and G's that show you the damage at different locations. Down here is this apartment building, and that's what we're a piece of the side roof, whatever that is, came off and went directly and hit before the woods. And there are snapped tree. It looks very green there, but there's some snapped limbs and such in here. And then this house B is just beyond these trees right here, kind of hidden. You see a little piece of the roof just above the letter B. And we had some branches impale the southwest side of that house, and that caught my attention, coming from the trees right behind it. So there's definitely a blast of wind here, and this garage door came off its track and crumpled under, but we have no uplift of the roof apparently. We didn't even lose shingles off of this house, just a little bit of soffit damage on that southwest side, which was interesting. And then right adjacent to it, C, we have these trees, conifers that sheared off about a third of the way up and went on the trailer home. And then D is a big roof, a big overhang porch, and the wind got up there, and we did have some uplift of the roof, and then the carport collapsed. There was like a carport thing next to a garage, and that collapsed. Now a little further down the road, in the corner of the neighborhood, so that's E. Now I'm going to picture this up in the upper right-hand corner. E, we had wind. Now this garage door was open. Talked to one of the owners. The kids were in the bath. She was giving her kids a bath when the storm hit. I heard the house shudder as the first few gusts of wind came through, and had remembered she had left the garage door open and went to close the garage door, and the wall had already blown out. So we overloaded the garage wall and it blew out. So that, of course, gets your interest and you want to see more about that. So we walked out around the whole yard and looked at everything. Nothing went anywhere. The wall blew out, everything went to the south, and then there's nothing lofted, nothing taken anywhere. Certainly not in tornadic cases where I've seen the same thing happen and things are that strewn hundreds of yards downstream. And getting at here's the next neighborhood up. We didn't even know this happened. Also, back to Belknap Apartments, insulation, nothing went downstream, nothing. That was really sort of, I'm looking for that. Okay, I should find pieces of this roof and pieces of this building, and almost down to this neighborhood. Certainly near the McDonald's area, the construction site, nothing. And there was some sporadic tree damage through that area, but you just don't see anything getting carried downwind. So that, to me, is kind of an eye-opener. It kind of tells the tale. These other ones here, we had another garage door that was directly facing the wind that buckled and came off its track and blew into the garage. There's another tree down behind the house that's down. But this is sort of the end. This is G. And then beyond that, we kind of, the damage kind of transitions. So there's actually some tree damage to the south, but nothing to the north anymore. At that point, or to the east for another mile or so. And it goes across a pretty dense area with just sort of garden variety tree damage spread out north-south. I don't think there's really anything else to tell you here. So then we get to survey site D, and this is where we really had second to the smaller mesocyclone, which we've been following, rotates into and merges with a larger one that's forming, where kind of to me, it almost looks like an HP supercell is rolling, is trying to develop on the line as it's ingesting vorticity from that low level sort of backdoor cold front coming in. And then we get this sort of larger swath of wind damage in a pretty forested area, but also this Grand River Drive area, some pretty big, expensive McMansions in this area too. And basically, there were some swaths of pretty good tree damage, snapped trees, but they were splotchy and there's not a really definitive track to them. Then up here where it says FHM, that's Forest Hills Northern. So I was able to get in touch with the superintendent facilities with Forest Hills Northern and got the surveillance video from them, so we could kind of have and this is only about a quarter of a mile from the damage to the school here. And in fact, there's damage around the school, and I'll see some damage at the school here in a minute. And there's also there was a concert in progress at Frederick Meyer Gardens, which they were in the process of evacuating the area. They saw the storm, they got the warning, and people were on their way into getting to their cars and taking shelter from the storm when it came through. So we talked to some eyewitnesses that were there as well. So here is the 745 now. We're looking at mesocyclone 1 still. The second one is just starting to organize. It's this sort of whole area is starting to spin up. There's a sort of a bounded weak echo region up here north of my white dot. And you can see the spectrum width where the inbounds are. You can even see the debris signature carried from that last neighborhood and from the Winnisock crossing I-196. And so now the white dot is where the school is looking at this. That's the vantage point here. So let me go ahead and put this in motion here. You can watch this up. What it looked like as it was coming through. Let me just back up here. I missed one last point here. You can see the wedge here in the still video. That's basically the circled area. We're looking right, that's looking southwest. That's looking right at the nose of this thing, if you will, as it comes in. So it's a very classic looking arc cloud that's racing, crosses the frame in 10 or 20 seconds. So now back to the video. So here's what actually happens. There's basically two pieces I'll show you. This is the initial surge. Show you about 30 seconds. So there was, this was one of the reasons I ended up talking to the superintendent of schools too, because he wanted to sort of review their safety plan, because they had a parent-teacher night going on when the storm came through. You can see it didn't faze anybody. You got a line of cars coming in and out of a parking lot as the squall line is going through. So here we are at 7:49. This is the initial piece here, and now at this point we have there's sort of two pieces going on in here. There's a really broad rotation now. We are starting to lose that first mesocyclone we've been following. We're seeing the broader one sort of tighten up, but we are seeing some pretty pretty good wind tree swaths coming down too. So let me go to the next frame. Now this is just another couple minutes, 7:51. So you can see how rapidly this is all. Now this little pink area over here, I think it's the first mesocycle. This little puppet right here, it's right in Roselle Park. And I think that's the first mesocyclone that's starting to move northeast and it's going all the way around. I think this other one is the larger one. So we actually see two spectrum width areas, one exiting Roselle Park and one just near the south of the school. Kind of going between the two so you can see the movement of the radar. So here's 2 minutes later. And if you watch the video enough times and you watch the whole, I obviously can't show you the whole thing 10 minutes, but there is a gradual change in the wind direction. At this point, it's blowing a little bit more out of the due west or west, slightly north of due west. And if you're watching very carefully, straight back, you'll see a tree go down. And the tree didn't follow the rules. It fell to the north. This catches my eye because before I got the video, I was out at the school, saw that tree down and was scratching my head going, I didn't fall that way. And it's probably leaning towards the north, but it fell. It's on a line of trees right along the edge of that driveway there, and it fell and crushed an SUV. Luckily, nobody was in it. And then the traffic that you see moving was just outside of where that SUV was parked. So it was just interesting with a sort of a west-northwest wind, the tree fell to the north. So you got to be kind of careful. It's kind of a lesson about not reading too much into the tree fall, any one given tree fall. We're ever out on these things looking at this stuff. So you could, I've tried to argue, tried to see myself looking at the video over and over. Do I see any changes in wind speed? What I basically think I see is several surges all around the same magnitude. Why that tree gave out in that one, I don't know, but I can't see an appreciable difference in wind speeds. It just blows for about 10 minutes solidly like this with a higher embedded breaking waves, breaking gusts. And that was basically the story we got from all the eyewitnesses interviewed along the path. Finally, this is Roselle Park, where we saw that in some of those nicer areas, and here you can see one of those in the foreground there, one of these sort of retreats, if you will, and then there's. But this is an area, you're not very far from where I live now, and I've probably surveyed this area the most because I bike regularly, and I'm out here all the time and bike through this area. So I've biked all through this damage numerous times. Saw it fresh again here in the last month, in the spring now, and it looks a little different because all of these are off, so you can see some of the trees that I didn't see, but then it's also confusing because there was also some tree fall here in July of last year from a derecho event that did a lot of damage up in Wisconsin, and then came across a lake and hit us at 1 a.m. But again, the damage fall pattern here, and it's a little bit complex in that I'm still unsure of today whether there was basically one surge or there were two surges as that mesocyclone sort of tightened up. If we go by Atkins simulation, it was probably one surge with waves of wind and a gradual change in direction from west-southwest to west-northwest as the system came through. And we're talking gradual over 10 minutes, so relatively speaking. And while this is impressive, you see this blowdown in A. That was a drone, and if I'd been running the drone, I would have been turned you around and shown you what the backside of that looked like. It's coming down a river valley. There's about a 150-foot drop, and it's really interesting how the wind, those areas are right here, just that short arrow coming off of A, that's where that is. And there's clear channeling of the wind down that ravine into the river valley here. We're down into the floodplain. You can see a little piece of the Grand River up at the top of that picture there. And there's several of those swaths like that on the north-south boundary. So if you're thinking, oh, well, that was just one and they're all in a line from east to west, well, that's a no-brainer. It's tornadic. But in fact, they're not. They're aligned north-south, and I don't think they're like individual vortices. They're all aligned with the ravines coming down into the river valley. So they look mechanically driven to me, not storm scale driven. And one of the towers, the roof came off the towers like that. So as we go into site E, this is the western end of E, and just a lot of branches down, trees uprooted, things like that. So this is a picture of us trying to get down into the back roads there right after it happened the next morning. But it was pretty much the rest of it. No building damage at all through this area, just tree damage, and pretty generic to me as far as my experience is concerned with seeing strong winds. Everything's blown to the east. And what was really interesting is even as the storm track turned to the southeast and even to the south, all the tree fall continued to be to the east, which was sort of interesting as well. So here's the radar loop of that last sequence now of the damage. Just like as it went through Roselle Park, went from site C through site D, and then E. You can kind of watch that mesocyclone tighten up and then start to weaken again as it continues downstream, and also starts to turn and get deflected to the southeast or propagate to the southeast as it rolls up on that boundary. And here it is sped up. Okay, so as far as the findings are concerned, I think that this was really a non-tornadic case. These things always give me a lot of pain trying to figure out just what they are, and because I just have such a keen meteorological interest in these things. But the pulse of this one, trying to figure out crime scene investigation, if you will. You're trying to figure out what was the perp trying to do here. Just what I was saying earlier, it seemed like the storm was trying to go tornadic and never quite could get its act together. So I really think it follows the classic Atkins, very strong rear inflow jet, the mesocyclone. We actually had a couple of them, and they merge, and you have enhancement of straight line, basically straight line winds. Obviously caveats for turbulent mechanical flow right near the surface. What was interesting was this idea of a debris signature that's not associated with a tornado, and that's sort of a side lesson learned here. And after this case, and since we've had several cases, and even one of our QLCS ones that we verified as a tornado. It was interesting that the debris signature in the QLCS tornado event showed up before the damage was observable on the ground. So that there's other small stuff getting sucked into these things, or they're getting lofted that can get into the beam and drop your CC, and it's not necessarily indicative of a tornado on the ground yet. So we've had a couple of false positives where we've had small circulations on radar that were near the radar that showed what looked like a QLCS, and ironically they were fall cases. And then we go out there and there's not even branches down. So false positives again. You don't know what's going on. And, well, other than you of course have a lot of non-met type dust, bugs, whatever, leaves getting caught up on the initial gust front boundary. If you do have a little cusp in that boundary, it's reasonable to think that debris, whatever it is, can get concentrated in those areas and mixed with precipitation and give you those CC dropouts when you don't really have a tornado per se. The one nice thing about them all is they're very shallow. They tend to be well within the boundary layer. And I think if you're appreciably far from the radar, the radar doesn't detect them at all. A little bit of speculation, though. I can't say that conclusively. I also thought it was interesting that we had a little bit in, if we were in a west case, we'd really do the up and down slices and really look and see that the development of that HP structure that was embedded in this as well. Another sort of side comment here too. I think if so first you're sort of looking at that boundary, that east-west boundary, that sort of hybrid backdoor cold front outflow boundary, thinking that was really important to the genesis of the wind damage. I actually think it enhanced it for a short while, but it ultimately probably saved us from a much longer lived event that hadn't have been there. I mean, the system was already developing mesocyclones and a bow apex, and it was already a mature QLCS before it really wrapped into that boundary too much. We might have had a series of, eventually had some tornadic QLCS segments to this thing if that boundary hadn't been there. Just some speculation on my part, but I think that boundary actually saved us from worse damage. Although it, for 10-15 minute period enhanced it, the wind damage that is. So as far as the ideas on going forward on I haven't really talked about our warning methodologies much here, but I hope we have the WIA activated SIG Severe coming out soon. I think it would be really great to have that warning in the tool, as a tool in our toolkit. I really do worry about an evolution towards issuing lots of tornado warnings, and this isn't new. This has been happening since the 88D was installed, when we started to detect and see all these things and better with the radar. We don't want to get wrapped around the phenomenological axle too much here. We really are in the warning business, and we want to be pragmatic about how we want. And so I'm all about impact-based warnings, in other words, long story short, and really would like to see us spend our time separating the wheat from the chaff. If we're going to warn for tornadoes, we really ought to be focused on EF2 and stronger, the ones that are life-threatening. And just being in a house isn't safe. EF0 and EF1, you're probably okay if you're in a building. But those stronger, and especially with QLCS winds, when we're talking about weak convergent mesocyclones and mesovortices with weak convergence, I think that's an important difference between that and the EF1 tornado with a lot of vertical motion, where you can loft a car or something. It would have been interesting if in terms of looking at hospital evacuations and all of that. And then the confusion you get into with QLCSs often are associated with flash floods. So when you're issuing tornado warnings and flash flood warnings together, that's kind of hard to tell people what to do and which one takes precedent. But just sort of food for thought there. But I think the SIG Severe would help us in that middle range when we're talking about EF0, EF1 wind damage, and particularly with these sort of QLCS storms. I think I wish we'd had that in our toolkit on September 11th, and I think most of my staff agrees. Even if we had put for possible in the wording or whatever, make ourselves feel better, that would have been the best way to warn the public, and gives us an anchor to work with our partners on getting the right response. I think that's all I have for today. So at this point, I can take questions